OPB Podcasts.
Live from the Gert Boyle studio, it's OPB Politics Now for Thursday, August 7th. Portland's finances are on the line as the Trump administration targets Democrat-led cities like it across the country. That should sound familiar. The city faced similar pressure during the president's first term, but this time is different. Will Portland leaders bend to the pressure and back off its reputation as a haven for liberal policies? We'll get into it. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Bryce Dole.
And I'm OPB Portland City Government reporter Alex Zielinski.
And before we get into it, a note that we are live on opb.org and on OPB's YouTube page. If you have any questions as we go, we can try and answer them during the taping. Thanks for joining us. And Alex, nice to see you. How are you?
Doing well.
Great
to be here.
Yeah. Let's start with the most recent news. Last week, Mayor Keith Wilson made a decision about how Portland was going to address Trump's executive order regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tell us where the mayor landed.
Yeah, so Wilson's order essentially directs city departments to make sure city policies comply with federal anti-discrimination laws. So it seems straightforward and kind of obvious, but since it comes hand in hand with Trump rolling out these executive orders that restrict DEI work, it's a little bit more significant. A reminder about Trump's executive order on DEI, or at least the one the city is responding to, that threatens to withhold federal grant money from jurisdictions with policies that violate the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Mm-hmm. And according to the federal government's current interpretation of that act, that includes any policies that attempt to prioritize certain races and genders above others. So equity programs that are meant to benefit marginalized groups. And in Portland, Mayor Wilson says that could include roughly 75 city programs and policies, like programs that prioritize contracts with minority-owned businesses, stuff like that. So it's a lot on the line.
75 policies sounds like a lot.
It is.
All right. So this is clearly a controversial decision. I think it's fair to say that. What was the mayor's reasoning behind his decision?
There's a lot of money on the line here. So Portland relies on about $350 million in federal grant funding a year for different programs, the majority of which go to housing and transportation projects, some of the city's biggest areas. These grants make up about 4% of the city's budget. And as we've spoken about in this podcast before, the city has been in a budget crunch for a few years. It's no sign of getting better anytime soon. So we really need every dollar we can from the feds, from the state, whoever it is. That's kind of Wilson's big drive here. It's also worth noting that if the city accepts grant money without making sure its equity language is in line with Trump's executive orders, the mayor or city administrator, whoever signs that kind of grant agreement, they could go to prison. So the stakes are high.
Very high. Why is this happening now?
Great question.
Yeah.
So what I didn't mention is the immediate focus in terms of grant money is this $31 million in grants that the city anticipates to receive this year. But to get them, they have to sign paperwork with the federal government confirming that no city policies violate anti-discrimination laws. And the deadline for that signing is early this month. I think we might have passed it. Mm-hmm. So they didn't have much time to wait. This is particularly why the mayor made the ruling through an executive order to change the wording here. Instead of going through city council, he can act a lot faster. One other thing related to timing, something that's got a little bit lost in this conversation, is that the fact that the city has already joined a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of this executive order. But that remains tied up in court as the grant deadline comes and goes, so who knows how long it could take to resolve. So Wilson thought it was important to respond now and then continue fighting down the line.
And is that a joint lawsuit with other cities?
Yeah, there's a long list of other jurisdictions that are part of that.
Got it. And how are people reacting so far to the mayor's decision?
Yeah, so, most city councilors seem to agree with Wilson's logic. They argue that without the federal money, the city could be letting down marginalized people even more than changing policy language around equity. I spoke with the ACLU of Oregon director Sandy Chung, who helped advise the mayor on this decision, and She made an interesting point. She said that cities are always responsible for aligning policies with federal laws, like the civil rights law. What makes these tweaks that, they should be done whether or not Trump is in office. That this is just what a city should be doing. And that's kind of the tack that the mayor took.
Got it. But this is also Portland that we're talking about. So there must be plenty of people who are displeased.
Oh, yeah. There are certainly a number of progressive groups and people that aren't happy with this choice. They say it's capitulating to Trump. One city councilor, Loretta Smith, has come out strongly against the order, saying that the city shouldn't comply with these anti-DEI orders in advance of any real punishment, that, it should wait until it's penalized from the White House before acting, and then maybe challenge those penalties in court. And earlier this week, we also saw that the local NAACP chapter sent a letter to Mayor Wilson condemning the order, kind of in line with what Councilor Smith is saying the city is sacrificing its values to benefit Trump. So a lot of people aren't thrilled. Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wonder, how Portland at this moment compares to other jurisdictions. How have other cities and local government leaders in other parts of this region, how have they responded to the president's order?
So Portland is a little behind other jurisdictions here. Really? Earlier this year, actually before Trump was even inaugurated, Clackamas County eliminated its Equity and Inclusion Office. Then the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners dissolved its DEI committee. Washington County voted to revise its equity policies, I think, last month. And on the other hand, Multnomah County Board of Commissioners joined Portland in the lawsuit that I mentioned earlier, and decided to do that instead of changing any equity-related language like Portland's doing. And I think within an hour of Mayor Wilson sharing the news of his executive order last week, Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell announced that Seattle would also be suing the Trump administration over the constitutionality of the DEI order, and they aren't changing any wording either. So there's a range of responses.
Mm-hmm. It's striking how all of this is kind of happening one after the other in seemingly a short time span.
Yeah, I mean, I think money is driving a lot of these decisions.
Yeah.
Federal funding.
But Wilson also made a point of saying that other jurisdictions have gone too far, right? Is that fair to say? I mean, how has he sought to differentiate what the city is doing here versus what other government entities have done so far?
Yeah, he hasn't, I don't think he's called any of them out by name, but kind of with a wink, he has defended his decision by pointing at these other jurisdictions that have gone further than Portland, some of those counties that I mentioned, ones that have eliminated entire DEI programs and erased any language related to DEI. That's not what's happening in Portland. They aren't doing a control F for, diversity, equity, inclusion, and trying to erase all of those. It's more reshaping some of these policies to make sure they seem like they're not specifically trying to benefit a certain race or gender. And Wilson's saying, look, we are not the same. We're just doing our part to follow federal law in hopes of getting some federal funding.
And if we can just kind of take a step back here and just look at the city generally, this is just one example, obviously, of how the city is choosing to respond to policies from the Trump administration. The city has also been, facing raids by federal immigration enforcement and lawsuits stemming from its policies as a sanctuary city. So far, help me understand how you have seen the city positioning itself in response to the federal government and the president's second term.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest response is in relation to what you mentioned, immigration policies. A few weeks ago in the podcast, we talked about the alarming number of people being swept up in ICE raids in the Pacific Northwest, and opposing those actions is front and center of the minds of Portlanders and people representing them. So not long after Trump entered office, he issued an executive order. He issued a ton of executive orders,
right.
But one of them—
It's hard to keep track.
Was threatening to withhold federal funds to sanctuary cities, so cities that refuse to collaborate with federal immigration officials. That includes Portland. In February, Portland joined a lawsuit against the Trump administration regarding this policy. That's really kind of the most front and center response we've seen to Trump tactics from the mayor's office until this equity language thing came up. But at city council, there's a lot more going on. For months, activists have been coming to City Hall demanding the city revoke a permit that allows ICE to use its building in South Portland for detention purposes. It's not a detention center. It's more of kind of an office building, but they do have detention holding cells. And so folks are kind of focusing on that building as a way to push back on ICE in general. And it's cracked open kind of an interesting dialogue in city council where even the more progressive people on council, the folks who are really staunch opponents of ICE, they're saying that closing this office might be misguided, that it means closing down access to a place that is critical for people trying to gain citizenship and go to appointments there. And that if someone is arrested by ICE, they'd be sent an hour north to Tacoma, which is a detention center with a pretty bad reputation. And it's also harder to reach by local lawyers and family. So councilors are still weighing about different ways to sanction ICE without making it harder for locals to access immigration services. Separate from City Hall, there's been protests on and off outside the ICE facility, and that's caught the administration's eye. Last month, the White House border czar, Tom Homan, threatened to come into Portland in an attempt to double down on the protests, and days later, we saw a blog post from Department of Homeland Security that shared images of the protests suggesting the building was under siege. So, worth noting also, earlier this week, Portland showed up on a list put up by the DOJ of counties and states that it plans to possibly sue because of their sanctuary city rules. So Portland is very much on their radar.
Wow. And I also recall there was a scene towards the end of your recent story where city leaders were speaking to people out in the atrium at
City Hall.
Can you describe a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, that was a moment where folks were disrupting a city council meeting, demanding that city council, hey, why are you guys still allowing ICE to operate here? We don't understand. Instead of, normally in City Hall, disruptors would be kind of kicked out and city council might go into a closed door session. But instead, a couple city councilors said, hey, let's go stand out in the atrium outside city council chambers and chat about this. And I want to hear your concerns and talk back. And that was, remarkable as someone who follows City Hall and has been in these meetings for a long time. You don't normally see that kind of attention given to folks who come in and disrupt council meetings. But it shows how much councilors truly care about showing that they're trying to stand up and trying to listen to the concerns of city council or to residents, and that they want to respond. And
the fine line that they have to navigate
sure,
too.
Exactly.
Right? And as we alluded to earlier, having to navigate these unexpected orders and policies from the Trump White House, it's not new to Portland. This is something that I know you've covered a lot over the years. We've been here before. Alex, take us back to the president's first term in 2017.
I would love to, Bryce.
How did Portland leaders push back against the administration then?
Yeah, it's interesting to look back at that time because the first term felt pretty different at the start. We saw people like then Mayor Ted Wheeler eagerly criticizing Trump online, tagging him in posts, coming out loudly in opposition to some of his earlier policies. And you didn't see the kind of fear and hesitation that maybe is seen more in civic leaders now. And Wheeler's, he really got the administration's attention. Trump used Portland as a punching bag again and again, criticizing how it handled the first ICE protest, Occupy ICE in 2018, how the city handled protests between the far right and far left groups. And then there was 2020, when the city's nightly racial justice protests were winding down and Trump decided to send in federal officers to crack down, which led to Portland looking like a war zone in national headlines and, giving a lot of maybe PTSD to folks living here. Mm-hmm. This didn't really keep Wheeler from backing off at all. Actually, let's hear what that sounded like. In 2020, a pro-Trump demonstrator was fatally shot during a downtown protest, and Trump went off, threatening to come in and clean up the city if Wheeler didn't. And here's how Wheeler responded to that.
So I'm going to do the work that I need to do here in my local community with my local officials to take accountability for what's happening on our streets. And I'd appreciate that either the president support us or he stay the hell out of the way.
So I feel like this is when we should cut to a live stream of Ted Wheeler off somewhere sipping a margarita on a beach, enjoying his post-mayor life. But anyway, this is pretty different energy from what we're seeing from our current mayor.
Yeah, and I also love seeing the photograph of you speaking to the mayor, right?
While we're both being tear gassed. Yes,
I mean,
different times.
It just reminds us as to where we've been too. How do you see this history affecting how Portland and its leaders are dealing with the Trump administration this time around?
Yeah, so there's definitely anxiety from people around getting the kind of negative national headlines that Trump brought Portland in 2020, fear of further damaging the city's reputation, which was pummeled during that time. I still have people asking me if I'm okay living in the burnt out husk that is Portland. Another thing that happened during those 2020 protests and that moment in time, you might remember, was a global pandemic. And that really hurt our local economy. We're still trying to recover from that.
Right.
So some counselors and business owners I spoke with, they said they're really worried about anything that could derail that recovery process. So maybe we should not poke the bear and somehow stay out of Trump's crosshairs.
Mm-hmm. Is there anyone saying that the city needs to be? Is there anyone taking a different tack? They're saying we need to be more outspoken in the city's response to an opposition to the Trump administration?
Yeah, definitely. A number of city councilors told me that they don't see any point capitulating to Trump. They don't see it worth risking the city's progressive values over any of this, that, this is the moment they should be standing up for Portlanders, not hiding, that being in Trump's crosshairs is inevitable, so why not come out swinging? A lot of that. I'm hearing this from folks in local political circles, too. I spoke with Salome Chimiko, who's the chair of the Multnomah County Democrats, about this, and here's what she said.
I don't think there's anything that our elected leaders could have said or not said that wouldn't have ended Portland up on Trump's radar. We're a natural foil to his administration. And so even if we were to stay quiet, I don't think it would change anything in terms of them coming after us. So
yeah, many people who share this thinking have also told me, why should we expect the Trump administration will even give us any money, even if we, play nice, which is a fair question.
Mm-hmm. And what about other major American cities? It seems that the Trump administration has, we've seen the news from Los Angeles and from New York City and the large protests and lawsuits that have happened and more in some of these cities. Again, this has been in the news a lot, but these cities have had somewhat different experiences, each of them. I kind of wonder, what could Portland learn from the experiences of some of these other cities?
Yeah, what's interesting is that no one has really figured it out, right? Mm-hmm. There's no guidebook to how to handle this situation, but we see these other cities responding in different ways, and neither really seem to change how the Trump administration responds. There's two cities you mentioned, for example, in New York. Mayor Eric Adams has been pretty soft on Trump. He's directed officials to refrain from criticizing the Trump administration, a move that also seemed meant to get the feds to drop corruption charges against him.
Right.
But then last month, we saw the Trump administration sue Eric Adams directly for the city's sanctuary city laws. And then in Los Angeles, we saw a city much more vocally opposed to Trump's immigration policies. And then they got a really heavy military crackdown in response. Even some lawmakers got arrested for intervening. So it's impossible to know how to respond the right way to avoid repercussions. It looks like, from these examples, it's maybe inevitable. I spoke with the ACLU of Oregon about this as well. And they said that cities should really be looking to other cities outside the U.S. that have operated under authoritarian regimes to better understand how to act and how to respond. That researching what worked there and what didn't is maybe the smartest way forward.
What are your expectations looking forward? If you can have any, do you foresee any potential impact from these changes that Portland is making?
It's so hard to speculate here. Right now the city is just kind of holding its breath and hoping Trump will actually give us some money to keep the city running. In the meantime, I know that some counselors are looking into ways to beef up protections for more vulnerable Portlanders. I don't know a ton of details, but I know they're looking at ways to help LGBTQ people who may be targeted by past or future executive orders, and same with future protections for immigrants. So there are some wheels turning. But it's really hard to know what the impact all of this will have.
Mm-hmm. And as somebody who's covered the city closely for a long time now, what do you think that this moment says about Portland in this moment of time? And about the mayor, as he's about halfway through his term in office, right?
Halfway through his first year.
Yeah.
So I think we've all been waiting to see how this pretty soft-spoken, earnest mayor will push back on the Trump administration. And, He's showing us now that he's not really going to bring the hammer necessarily. Not going to maybe speak in the same tones that we heard Ted bring. I don't know if it's meeting the expectations of, fiery progressive Portlanders, but it could work. I think it's just so hard to know exactly what the right move is here. Like I said, no one knows the right path. But Wilson, he came into office in a pretty singular focus to address the city's homelessness crisis, not to be a warrior against Trump. So, here we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Seems like things change all the time. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Mm-hmm. Alex, thank you so much.
Pleasure to be here.
All right. This week's live stream episode was recorded live in the Gert Boyle studio at OPB. It was produced by Andrew Thien. Our audio engineer is Naleen Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. In these uncertain times, we are certain that you have questions about local politics. Maybe we can answer them. We would love to hear from you. Email us at opbpoliticsnow@opb.org. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.